in any way, but because he treated me so well that I thought I'd always be spoiled like that. But a month ago a stranger sent me a photo. In the picture there was a man slicing an apple. His hand bore a scar, a distinct one. It's the same scar my husband has. I am an only child. From a very young age I understood one thing: even if I did nothing for the rest of my life, my father, a top executive at one of the country's 10 largest real estate firms, had enough wealth to ensure I'd live in luxury forever. Even to the point of extravagance. In college, I couldn't understand why people worked themselves to the bone for a scholarship. A few $1,000s that wouldn't even buy a single shoe from the pairs my mom casually picked up for me on her weekend shopping trips. Later, when I started working, I didn't get why people stayed in jobs that made them miserable. What could possibly be more important than your own happiness? I met my husband during an internship at a psychology summit. He was the head of business partnerships for the event, and I was there as a representative from my company. That day I happened to ride the elevator with one of the most renowned psychologists in the country, Dr. Smith. As soon as he stepped in, the others in the elevator rushed to greet him, vying for his attention and contact information. Everyone but me. I stood quietly, hands at my sides, indifferent to the scene. After the summit, a man walked up to me. For a moment there, I thought you weren't part of this industry, he said. I looked up at him. He was wearing a perfectly tailored suit, smiling down at me. When he smiled, his lower eyelids pulled up and his eyes curved into crescents. He looked genuinely happy. I am sorry. What do you mean? I asked. In the elevator earlier when Dr. Smith came in. You didn't seem excited at all. Should I have been? If I wanted to meet Dr. Smith, all it would take was one phone call from my father. Lunch with him could be arranged in a heartbeat. Why would I need to squeeze my way through a crowd? The man handed me his business card. William Dean, business director. Then he asked for my contact information. And then he pursued me. William was the most thoughtful boyfriend I could have imagined. He memorized my menstrual cycle and slipped painkillers and my favorite candies into my bag before it even started. He accompanied me on shopping trips, offering opinions on every outfit I tried on. Unlike those men who think it's beneath them, he even sent thoughtful gifts to my parents. Naturally, as my perfect boyfriend, he wouldn't overlook them. But when William visited my parents' house, my father sometimes seemed less than thrilled. What's wrong? I asked him one evening. He sighed. I just can't bear the thought of someone taking my precious daughter away from me. I laughed and hugged him. Don't worry, Dad. I'll always love you. Eventually, I married William just as my parents had hoped I would, with happiness in my heart and a smile on my face. At the wedding, I overheard some guests whispering, Miss Swan is so exceptional, but her husband just a director. They're not even in the same league. Such a shame, she could have done so much better. I listened to their words, feeling nothing but disdain. Sure, William didn't have as much money as I did, but we had love. What could these petty, narrow-minded people possibly understand about that? The love I was once so proud of, the kind that I thought was unshakable, was ripped open a month ago, exposing its darkest, most broken pieces. It forced me to confront the truth I never wanted to see. That day, after finishing a counseling session, I checked my phone and noticed a new follower on Instagram, a woman's profile with a faceless avatar. At first, I paid it no attention. She didn't send a greeting or introduce herself. Instead, she simply messaged me a photo. The image showed a man slicing an apple with a fruit knife. His face wasn't visible. Then came a message. Your husband is cutting an apple for me. Such a simple sentence, yet it landed like a thunderbolt. For a moment I froze, completely overwhelmed by a mix of disbelief and dread. The words, dripping with mockery and a triumphant air, clenched my heart like a vice. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as if I were walking into a battlefield, and zoomed in on the photo. In that instant my world stopped. The man in the photo was William. I knew it not from his face but from the scar on his left hand right at the base of his thumb. Had told me how he got it. Back in middle school, had been messing around after learning about friction in physics class. He kept scraping a steel ruler against the floor until it heated up, and then pressed it against his hand to test the temperature. He didn't realize how quickly metal conducts heat. The burn left a scar that stayed with him forever. When he told me the story, I laughed at him for days, teasing him for being so adorably foolish. Now that same scar stared back at me in the photo, as unmistakable as a signature. The woman's profile had no posts, no bio, just the back of a figure in a white dress as her avatar. I hesitated, then typed a single message: "Who are you?" I waited, but there was no response. I screenshotted the conversation and closed my phone, my fingers shaking. The pride instilled in me since childhood wouldn't allow me to send another message. To do so would mean admitting I'd lost control. And that was unacceptable. After graduating, I opened my own psychotherapy practice in Manhattan. My dad funded it, but even now, business isn't great. Still, my life is perfect that I have incredible parents. I have William, who loves me deeply. William, who always reassures me that success takes time and who never lets me feel like a failure. He's so kind and supportive. How could someone like him ever betray me? It's just a photo. That doesn't prove anything. But I'm terrified. Since we got married, I've realized William and I don't share the same type. He's drawn to intelligent, sophisticated women, blonde, curvy, confident. And me? I'm just a woman who followed the career path my father planned for me after college. I don't have strong opinions or grand ambitions. I'm clingy, I have a bit of a spoiled temper, and am not exactly well endowed. The thought pounds at my temples, sharp and relentless, that I don't want to ask. I don't want to know. I don't want to face it. As long as William keeps treating me well, everything else is just an obstacle to our love, something we can ignore, move past, pretend doesn't exist. Just then, William texted me. A client gave me 2 tickets to a show tonight, Stendhal's The Red and the Black. I know you love it. I'll pick you up after work. He attached the poster for the show. See, William remembers the things I love. William doesn't even like musicals. But every time he goes out of his way to join me to make me happy. Isn't that proof enough that he loves me? Looking at his message, I decided to trust him. Okay, love, I replied. Unlike usual, when William would drive into the basement parking lot to wait for me this time, I went downstairs early. I couldn't wait to throw myself into his arms, to tell him how much I loved him. I could already imagine him cupping my face, smiling as he said, "You're adorable." Standing by the curb outside my office, I waited. William arrived right on time. I got into the car, buckled my seatbelt, and greeted him warmly. Hi, love. As always, I instinctively reached for William's phone, already connected to CarPlay, to help him navigate. The theater was at Culture Square, quite far from my office. During Manhattan's evening rush hour, even the most experienced driver needed navigation to avoid the gridlock. I opened his phone and pulled up the navigation app to search for the destination. We had just been to Culture Square last month, so I skipped the search bar and went straight to the recent destinations. But it wasn't there. Confused, I clicked on More History. And that's when I saw it. Recently, William had been to New York University and a nearby hotel. Suddenly, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the sea air. No. This couldn't be. William would never do that to me. I tried to calm myself down. William is a business director. He probably went there to meet with suppliers. Maybe the hotel was just a quiet place for meetings. But my hands betrayed me. They were trembling as I clutched his phone, unable to let it go. I sat there, silent, staring at the screen for what felt like an eternity. Next to me, William turned his head slightly, sensing something was wrong. He panicked. His eyes darted nervously, glancing between me and the road. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his scarred left hand fidgeting as he rubbed the leathered AT. That moment, the impossible began to feel disturbingly possible. The car was quiet. I said nothing the entire ride, my mind consumed by the memories of us. I thought about the times I couldn't understand why he didn't quit a job that made him so unhappy. Back then, he'd look at me with that tired, weary face and say, "Maria, I love your smile the most. You're always so carefree, like nothing in the world can trouble you." At the time, I believed he genuinely loved me. His words filled me with satisfaction. But now, as I replayed those moments, I began to see them differently. It wasn't love he was expressing. It was envy. Pain is everywhere in the world, but for the longest time I didn't see it. My parents shielded me from all of it, allowing me to grow up in their carefully crafted bubble of freedom and comfort. Later, I began to see the pain of others, but I got used to ignoring it. And now, today, my marriage and my once unshakable belief in love have begun to crack. I could choose to smile as I always have, pretending nothing was wrong. Or I could choose otherwise. William could sense my unease. He glanced at me several times during the drive, even slamming on the brakes twice in his distraction. But I had already made my decision. Turning to face him, I gave him a small, gentle smile and said in the sweetest tone I could muster, "Keep your eyes on the road." That evening, I sent a message to the woman's Instagram account. "Let's meet." It took her a while to reply. "Sure, at your office." She even knew where I worked while I didn't even know if she was a man or a woman. Alright. Monday. 4 p.m. My schedule was packed that day, but 4 p.m. was the only time I was free. She didn't respond after that. The conversation ended abruptly, like she was trying to provoke me. On Monday morning, I carefully prepped my skin, blow-dried my hair, and applied light makeup. I reached for a brand new highlighter and contour kit I'd bought but never used. But then I hesitated. God, Maria, this isn't you. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, a self-deprecating smile creeping onto my lips. With a sigh, I tossed the makeup back into the drawer, smoothed my hair, and walked out of the bathroom. By 3 p.m. A stranger was already sitting in my office lobby. It only took one glance for me to know it was her, long flowing hair. A white dress, no accessories, her look soft and understated, but her golden hair and the way her chest rose and fell with every breath radiated a quiet sensuality, a type of allure that begged to be noticed. She was exactly William's type. I nodded politely and smiled at her, pretending not to know anything, then walked away. At exactly 4 p.m., I had my assistant escort her into my office. She stormed in, full of confidence, but as soon as she stood still, she couldn't help glancing around. It was clear she admired the space. The rent here was outrageous, but my father had insisted on it. A beautiful office inspires trust from clients and employees alike. Head said. He was right. Not only did it earn me my clients' trust, but it also invited envy from competitors and often their missteps. The girl took a deep breath, sat across from me and skipped any pleasantries. Maria, I've known about you for a long time. I'm here to say that everyone has the right to pursue love. Don't they? Her opening caught me off guard. This was not how I expected the conversation to start. Aren't you going to introduce yourself first? I asked, easily breaking the forceful aura she was trying to project. A life of privilege had taught me one thing: no matter who I faced, I could never see myself as lesser. She hesitated, then said her name was Alina, a name I assumed was fake. She was 24, a senior at NYU. Of course. She was just a naive girl, still young enough to believe in being a secret lover for someone like William. It's a human right, she began, her tone growing impassioned. Even if there's the constraint of marriage, people have the right to chase love and freedom. Marriage is outdated. It shouldn't even exist in this world. When it comes to love, you and I are equals. Her voice rose with every sentence, her emotions spilling over. She wasn't just defending herself, she was attacking me. In her mind, I was the one in the wrong. She was so convinced she was justified, that William was justified, that love itself was justified. And that I was not. She was right about one thing: I had made a mistake. But not in the way she thought. It wasn't a mistake toward her. Or William. I didn't argue with her. I didn't have the energy. I've never been good at debates, and it was clear she'd come armed with arguments rehearsed in front of a mirror. Instead, I let the pen I was holding drop to the floor. Let me just grab that, I said as I bent down, interrupting her impassioned speech. It's my go-to move when I don't want to engage, an innocuous little gesture to derail the conversation. When I straightened back up, she seemed to have lost her train of thought. Taking the opportunity, I spoke first. Are you an Aquarius? She blinked, startled by the sudden question, but nodded. How did you know? How could I not? I'm an Aquarius too. Back in college, I was obsessed with the idea of romantic idealism. Lady Chatterley's Lover, The Lover, those books defined my view of love at the time. It was childish, of course. Even my father used to roll his eyes at me back then. Thankfully, William taught me reality. Just a guess. You're such a romantic. Alina didn't like how easily I saw through her. She disliked my calm, detached demeanor even more. Her tone turned sharp again. Can't you just let him go? Let yourself go. Stop dragging this out and making everyone miserable. And then she started crying. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over slowly as her chest heaved with emotion. Her young face, streaked with glistening tears, was a picture of raw vulnerability, radiating pain and self-righteous indignation. The way her body shook with each sob, the way she looked so fragile, so wronged. She was the kind of woman any man would want to protect. I reached for a tissue, ready to hand it to her. But before I could, her next words stopped me cold, my hand frozen midair. You two don't even have a sex life anymore. A sexless marriage is doomed to fail. Did William tell you that? He's been suffocating in your marriage for too long. Suffocating? Last week, William and I had just celebrated our one-year wedding anniversary in Miami. That night, he leaned in close and whispered, "Baby, How about we try some Viagra? Let's make this anniversary extra special. William was always looking for ways to keep the spark alive, but this suggestion had me laughing out loud. I playfully poked him in the chest. That's weird. He laughed it off but didn't let it stop him. And yet that night we went 3 rounds. At least 10 different positions. I could still feel the pressure of the beige love seat pressed against my knees by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The glow of Miami's skyline sparkled in the background as William moved behind me, relentless, fierce, more intense even than our first night together. I glanced at Alina, her chest still heaving from her earlier tears, and a wave of nausea hit me. That night in Miami, was he picturing her? Was that why he preferred positions where he didn't have to see my face so he could imagine hers instead? What do you even like about him? Alina flushed, her head lowering. She told me she'd met William at a music festival. It had been one of those humid summer evenings where everyone was lost in the pulse of the music, drinks in hand, bodies moving to the beat. But not William. He stood at the edge of the crowd, a cigarette between his fingers, his face shadowed with melancholy. While everyone else reveled in the chaos, he remained still, his deep eyes carrying a world of untold sorrow. She said he looked like Brad Pitt in one of his more brooding roles. Of course, I thought bitterly. That night, William was there for business, negotiating a partnership. She described how 6 different men had approached her that evening, asking for her number, but only William had told her to get back to her dorm early. Had said, "A beautiful girl like you needs a night. Let me be your night tonight." A woman like Alina, hopelessly romantic, had fallen for him the moment she saw him. She thought it was the kind of spark that ignites true love, a flame that never dims, never dies. William had offered to drive her back to campus, opening the car door for her, buckling her seatbelt, and waiting until she was safely inside her dorm building before leaving. That was the night Alina decided she loved him. She continued, recounting the little things. How William would bring her cinnamon rolls and painkillers during her period. How he always positioned himself protectively behind her whenever they went out. Each detail she shared was like an echo of my own life with William. I should have felt anger, betrayal, even despair. But all I felt was irony. Alina believed she had stumbled upon some grand, romantic destiny. But William's tenderness wasn't unique, it was a script. How pitiful. And yet, wasn't I just as foolish? I once believed those same gestures, his attentiveness, his warmth, were proof of love. Now they felt hollow, as if I'd mistaken a series of well-rehearsed lines for the real thing. The real joke wasn't on Alina. It was on me. Did you notice the wedding ring on his finger? I asked this directly, but my tone wasn't accusatory. It was curious that if William had deliberately taken off his ring, then Alina was just a pitiful victim of his deception. But Alina hesitated. Her eyes darted away, unable to meet mine. He told me your marriage is just an empty shell, she said after a pause. He promised he'd divorce you. Oh. Not pitiful. Just foolish. Foolish like me. Ignoring all the warning signs that had been there all along. Did he ever tell you when he'd divorce me? I asked calmly. Alina's voice grew fervent. When your mother's health improves, he said. That's when he'll finally leave this family. My mother's health. The same mother who's currently enjoying a luxurious vacation on a tropical island. I stared at her, my confusion apparent. Sensing this, Alina quickly added, Maria, I'm begging you. Let William go. I can live without everything else, but I can't lose this love. I looked at her tear-streaked face. My expression unreadable. Did you tell William you were coming to see me? She hesitated again but ultimately shook her head. No, I leaned back, my voice steady. All right. Promise me 3 things. Do them, and if you still love him the way you say you do, I'll leave. On one condition, everything stays confidential. Her eyes lit up instantly, but she didn't agree right away. Instead, she raised a skeptical eyebrow. What if you ask me to do something insane? Am I supposed to go along with it, even if it's murder? I smiled faintly. Don't worry. Nothing illegal. Nothing immoral. If you don't want to do it, you can refuse at any time. Fine. But you'd better keep your word. And just like that, we struck a deal. Alina left with her head held high, her chest puffed with self-assured pride. A few days later, I scheduled a full health checkup for my mom. The VIP section meant no waiting in line, and all William and I had to do was accompany her. As always, William was the epitome of a caring son-in-law, fussing over her with gentle concern. At every examination room, he was the one speaking to the doctors the most. Doctor. Does this nodule require surgery? Should she be on medication? At what size does it become concerning? What precautions should she take in daily life? Got it. Thank you very much. 40+ tests later, William had left no detail unchecked, no question unasked that he was, without a doubt, the perfect son-in-law. On our way out, a nurse asked with a polite smile, "Would you like the report in digital format or as a printed copy?" Without looking at William, I turned to my mom. "Let's go with a printed version. That way, you can always flip through it." The nurse nodded. "Sure. Please leave your address and we'll arrange for delivery." I smiled faintly and turned to William. "William, why don't you leave your address? You were the one asking all the detailed questions." "Okay," he said without hesitation, stepping up to provide the information. A week later, the report arrived. Alina reached out again with a message. "It's set. We're meeting tonight." This was the first of the 3 tasks I had assigned her. She was to arrange a meeting with William at a specific time, directly after work on the day the health report was delivered. William wouldn't risk staying out overnight. I knew that. And I also knew the report had been delivered. "There's a file in his bag," I told her. "Make sure to check it." "What file?" she asked. "My mother's health report." At night at 11 p.m., William came home. His usual energy seemed noticeably dulled. I pretended not to notice and instead played the role of a concerned daughter. "Can I see my mom's report?" "Everything's fine, right?" I asked with deliberate casualness. "Yeah, it's fine," he said, pulling a slightly crumpled document from his bag. Just as I had expected. Taking the report to the study, I opened my laptop and started Googling the medical terms I didn't understand. At the same time, I messaged Alina. "Did you look at the report?" She must have been awake, because her reply came almost instantly. He said, "Your mom's illness is indirectly recurring." "And you believed him?" Her reply came much slower this time. After a long pause, just 2 words appeared. "I did." Of course she did. Before Alina came into the picture, I believed every word William said too. Alina visited my office again. This time I placed a clear folder in front of her. Inside were altered lab results and a pregnancy test. Her reaction was immediate. She didn't even look closely before her emotions spilled over. Her voice rising. "You're pregnant." I remained calm. "Oh, you are." The second task was to have Alina tell William she was pregnant. At first she hesitated. The Alina from before, the one who had so passionately argued that everyone has the right to pursue love, would have seized this opportunity without a second thought. She would have already been imagining the scene where William divorced me to marry her. But now she wasn't so confident. Still, I could see the temptation in her eyes. She desperately wanted to know how much William truly cared for her. This answer meant everything to her. I didn't push her. Instead, I quietly poured her a cup of coffee. It was a new blend I'd bought last month. Dark roasted beans, far too bitter for most. When I returned to the meeting room with a white bone china cup in hand, Alina was still frozen in her seat, staring at the lab report on the table. I placed the coffee in front of her, and she finally looked up at me. For a moment she seemed at a loss for words. "Try it," I said. "It's a new roast I picked up. Dark roast. You won't find this in most places." She lifted the cup hesitantly, took a small sip and immediately winced. "It's so bitter." "It is," I said with a faint smile. "But it's addictive." Alina agreed to the plan. As she left, I handed her a gift box of baby bottles. "This is a complimentary gift from the maternity hospital for first-time visitors. You should take it," I said casually. She didn't question it. She took the box with her. Inside, nestled among the baby bottles, was a discreet listening device. 2 days later, William was scheduled to work late. I sat at my desk with headphones on, listening as the events unfolded. The first sounds that came through were unmistakable, the intimate noises of kissing, heavy breathing, and murmured phrases dripping with desire. "Your chest is so soft. You feel amazing." Then suddenly Alina interrupted. "William, stop. I have something to tell you." William's voice was thick with confusion and irritation at being stopped. "I am pregnant." "What?" "Look, hey, race the pregnancy test. I'm pregnant. Let's have this baby, William. Once you divorce her, we can get married." For a moment, there was only silence on the other end. Then William's voice came, cautious and uncertain. "Are you sure? Maybe you should double-check." I smiled bitterly. Even in the face of such a dramatic revelation, William's first instinct was doubt. Alina must have felt it too. There was a long pause before she replied, her voice higher and more strained. You think I'm lying to you, Paulina. I just think maybe the test isn't accurate. It is accurate. I even went to the hospital to confirm it. They found the heartbeat. The sound of rustling papers followed. Likely her handing over the fake medical results ID given her. Sweetheart, let's get married, she urged, her voice filled with desperate hope. But William didn't answer. I glanced at the clock in the corner of my screen. 2 full minutes passed without a word from him. Finally, Alina broke the silence. Do you even want this baby? Are you planning to divorce her or not? William, sensing the rising anger in her voice, immediately tried to soothe her. Alina. You're so young. You haven't even graduated yet. Do you really want to give up your career for a baby? He didn't wait for her response. Instead, he ended the conversation abruptly. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. Then came the sound of a door closing, and a moment later, Alina's quiet sobs. For 3 days I heard nothing from Alina. William, meanwhile, hadn't visited her once. But his behavior at home changed. He was smoking again, something had nearly quit for my sake, and far more often than usual. Every night, he'd retreat to the backyard with a cigarette in one hand and his phone in the other, its screen glowing in the dark. I hated the smell of smoke. William knew that. But I didn't say a word. I let him think I hadn't noticed. He also didn't realize I knew he wasn't texting anyone new. His phone screen was always on the same chat window, the one with Alina. On the 4th day, Alina barged into my office, bypassing the front desk entirely. What did you say to William? She demanded, her voice shaking with anger and desperation. I looked up from my desk, feigning confusion. I didn't say anything. Alina stood there, disheveled and vulnerable. She wore a baggy black t-shirt, dark jeans and cheap mismatched flats. Her face was bare, no makeup to conceal the tears streaking down her cheeks. She wiped at her face with her hand, smudging the tears but failing to stop them. He hasn't replied to me in a day, she said, her voice cracking. Last night he was still saying goodnight to me. What did you do? I tilted my head slightly, keeping my expression calm. I didn't do anything. Alina stared at me, wide-eyed and tearful, struggling to process what I'd said. He doesn't want your baby, I said, breaking the silence. He's not going to marry you. And he doesn't love you. My words shattered the last bit of hope she was clinging to. What makes you think he loves you? She shot back, desperation turning to venom. Is it because you're richer than me, because you have this beautiful office, because you... Her voice trailed off. She couldn't finish the sentence. She couldn't admit what she was really thinking, that she felt inadequate in ways she couldn't overcome. Is that why he loves you? She whispered bitterly. I glanced at the family photo on my desk, William, my parents and me smiling together. He didn't love me. Not really. What William loved was the status my family gave him, the power that came with being tied to my name. He loved the benefits of being my husband. And maybe, in some small way, he loved me as a convenient accessory to all of that. Are you still willing to go through with the 3rd step? Alina hesitated, her guilt evident. She shook her head instinctively, wanting no part of it. But I wasn't about to let her off so easily. I had carefully planned every step, and now that we were on this road, there was no turning back. You're not stopping here, I said, locking eyes with her. My tone was firm, unyielding. The 3rd step will show you once and for all who William truly loves. Alina waited in the lobby of William's office for 3 hours. I waited too, tucked behind the lush greenery of the cafe's seating area on the 1st floor, watching everything unfold. When William finally appeared, Alina rushed to intercept him. After days of unanswered messages and ignored calls, this was her first chance to confront him. Don't you love me anymore? Her voice cracked with raw emotion, tears streaming down her face. She looked as heart-wrenching as the first time I'd seen her, her chest heaving with every sob, desperate and vulnerable. But William wasn't moved, his tone was cold. Irritated. What do you want from me? Didn't I tell you to wait for my call? Why are you here? His words dripped with frustration. Do you want to ruin me? Alina cried harder. What are you afraid of? You're the one who promised me a divorce. Don't be a coward, William. William's voice rose, sharp and angry. I said I'd divorce her, but not now. He stepped closer to her, his voice turning icy. Get rid of the baby. We'll pay for it. Just do what I say, understand? Alina froze. The force of his words seemed to suck the air out of her lungs. For a moment, fear flickered across her face. Even when it's someone you love, when a man speaks with that kind of anger, there's an instinctual fear. A primal fear that he might strike, that he might go further. She stepped back, trembling. At that moment I called William. Hi love. When are you coming out? I'm downstairs waiting for you. William's voice shifted immediately, adopting a calm, patient tone. I'm just stepping out. I'll be there in a minute. He turned to leave, but Alina lunged forward, grabbing his arm. You're not leaving until you tell me the truth. William's patience snapped. He violently yanked his arm free, sending Alina sprawling to the floor. She landed hard, the impact echoing in the lobby. If she had truly been pregnant, she might have lost the baby then and there. William looked down at her, his face a mask of disdain. His voice was dismissive, almost cruel. Get up and get out of here. When I approached the car holding a bouquet of flowers, William stood beside it, his face dark and brooding. Where were you? He asked, his voice sharp. I went to buy flowers from the corner shop, I replied smoothly, not missing a beat. Once I was in the car, William slammed the accelerator, the car lurching forward aggressively. His frustration was palpable. But then as we turned a corner, Alina appeared out of nowhere, darting into the street. William slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt just inches away from her. My heart nearly stopped from the shock. Alina ran to the driver's side, screaming at William through the window. William didn't even glance her way. He rolled up the window, turned up the music, and ignored her completely. I steadied my breath, feigning ignorance. Who is that? William leaned back in his seat, his irritation clear. No one. Just a crazy woman. The next day I received a message from Alina. Help me. This time we met at Alina's rented apartment. Standing in the small room, I took in my surroundings. The colors were coordinated, but everything spoke of youth and cheapness. The curtains were made of plain burlap, translucent enough to disrupt sleep. The wardrobe, though a pleasant shade of light wood, was made of composite material, not solid wood, and barely sturdy enough to lean against the wall. The bedspread was wrinkled and visibly not made of goose down. It couldn't possibly feel soft or luxurious against the skin. If it weren't for Alina's youthful beauty filling the space, there was no way someone like William, used to sprawling, elegant homes, would spend more than a day here. When I finally turned my attention to Alina herself, I was shocked. Her arms were covered in visible bruises and a bump marred her smooth forehead. He came over last night, she said weakly, her voice tinged with desperation. I thought he was here to reconcile, she continued, tears welling up, but he came only to argue. He said I shouldn't have gone to see you and brought up the abortion again. Did he hit you? I asked, glancing at the marks on her skin. Alina's expression darkened. She hesitated, then shook her head before nodding slightly. Finally she lowered her gaze. He might have just pushed me by accident. Did you tell him what I asked you to? Yes. The third step was simple, have Alina ask William for a loan, not much, just 20,000. That the story was pre-written. She needed the money not just for the abortion but also to help cover her parents' medical expenses after a fabricated accident. I handed Alina the fake medical reports and payment records in advance. Last night she showed them to William. At first he had raged at her, but eventually he calmed down. Fine, he said after a long pause. I'll figure something out. Alina had believed him. But by the next day, William had blocked her on every platform. Calls to his number now returned the dreaded message, this number is not in service. Maybe I asked for too much, Alina ventured timidly, still holding on to some faint hope. I pulled out my phone and brought up William's financial records. Placing the screen in front of her, I pointed to his account balance, 7 figures. William isn't short on money, I said flatly. Alina stared at the numbers for a long time. Then she collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing uncontrollably, her cries filling the small, cramped apartment. July arrived, marking 2 significant events: Alina's upcoming graduation and my father's birthday. My father, never one for ostentation, had agreed to a small, intimate celebration, thanks to my careful planning. That morning I sent Alina the time and location of the dinner. She replied with a single word, "I'll be there." William was in high spirits at the dinner, tirelessly toasting my father and delivering a fresh compliment with each drink. I watched him with a serene smile, waiting patiently for the moment I'd arranged. At exactly 8 p.m., Alina entered the restaurant. Striding directly to our table, 3 pairs of eyes froze on her. William's face turned ashen the moment he saw her. My father, noticing William's reaction, glanced at me. Seeing my calm demeanor as I continued sipping my wine, he quickly pieced everything together. He gave a subtle signal to my mother. who immediately masked her shock and confusion, her expression becoming composed. William tried to take control of the situation. "Who are you, miss? You must be mistaken," he said, his voice rising in fake alarm. Alina wasn't having it. "William, stop pretending. How can you not even tell the truth in front of your wife? You're a coward." "What nonsense are you talking about?" William snapped, his voice tinged with panic. "I don't know you." Then, in a moment of desperation, he shoved Alina forcefully, trying to push her away. Alina shoved William away, glaring at him with unbridled fury. "My dad had an accident and needs surgery. Add in the abortion costs, compensation for emotional damage and living expenses. I want 100,000. If you give me the money, I'll never bother you again." William looked at her as if she'd just told a bad joke. He kept up his act, feigning ignorance. "Are you insane? I don't even know you." But Alina had come prepared. She pulled the pregnancy report from her bag and slapped it down on the table. The force nearly knocked over the wine glass in front of me. Clearly, she was fully in character now. She turned to me, her voice steady. "Your husband cheated on you. Hey, race the proof." Then she rounded on William, her tone sharp and unrelenting. "If you don't pay up, I'll hand this report directly to her." William lost it. His veneer of calm shattered, and in a fit of rage he grabbed a glass of water and hurled it toward Alina's head. "William, stop." My father's voice cut through the chaos. William might ignore me, but my father was a different story. He froze mid-action, his face pale as he glanced nervously at my father. "Did I ask what this young lady says true?" my father asked, his tone even but heavy with authority. William shook his head frantically. "No, Mr. White, it's not true. She's lying, just a scammer trying to extort me." My father stared at him for a long moment, his silence suffocating. Then he spoke again, his words deliberate. "Did I ask it true? Don't make me ask you a third time." William stammered, his voice quivering with desperation. Then, in a moment of complete collapse, he dropped to his knees. "I am sorry. I made a mistake. Baby, I swear it was just a moment of weakness. I'm a fool, an idiot. Please, Maria, forgive me. I'll never do it again." He crawled toward me, clutching at my legs like a drowning man. I looked down at him, the man I'd once loved, now groveling at my feet. What had I ever seen in him? Calmly, I set my wine glass down and said, "Let's get a divorce." William scrambled closer, his hands gripping my legs tighter. "Oh, Maria, please. I love you. I can't live without you. Who will take care of you if I'm gone?" I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. "William, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm telling you that I stood to leave." But William clung to me, his grip tightening. My father walked over and, with a single decisive kick, sent William sprawling. "Get lost." My father spat. "Do you think I don't know what you're after? You think staying married will give you access to my company after I'm gone?" William, still sprawled on the floor, looked up in shock, trying to decipher my father's words. "You must think we're fools," my father continued, his voice cold. "But my estate is already in a trust. Only my daughter and her children will ever inherit it." William sat there, stunned, his face drained of color. Without another word, we walked out at the door of the restaurant. Alina turned to me. "Your father is amazing." I smiled faintly. "He is." Leveraging my father's influence, William agreed to a divorce without a fight. Alina graduated soon after. I sent her a message. "I've mailed you a check." She replied almost immediately. "Why?" "That 100,000 you asked for." "Take it." "I can't. It's not mine to take." "Take it anyway. You deserve it. I hope you find a better life." 2 months later, William showed up at my office. It was the middle of my period, and he came bearing an assortment of my favorite desserts. Standing there, he looked pitiful, calling my name softly. "Maria." I didn't even flinch. Instead, I called security and had him escorted out. Over the next year, my practice flourished, doubling its revenue. More importantly, I found new purpose and stability in my life. I knew deep